What's up, everybody? Peter Exoso Coffee here. Welcome to another episode of Level Up the Personal Branding Podcast. And today I'm doing another episode on Prince, and it's Prince and Branding in the 90s and beyond. So I did a long episode on Prince and his overall branding and touched on the 90s, but there's a couple things I missed. So I wanted to circle back and do kind of a part two for Prince. Um, as you know, I'm a big Prince fan, and guess what? I mean, I'm gonna, carve out a Prince, entire Prince podcast and to go through, talk about various things Prince, and but also talk about go through and kind of do a review on every album. So, uh, the things I missed in that first episode, the first is, of course, when I mentioned Prince having the fight with the Warner Brothers. But, he did two things in the 90s that are noteworthy or, you know, beyond the music being noteworthy. And that's first, he changed his name from Prince to a symbol. And the second thing he did is he wrote the word slave on his face and had to come back and redo this because even, a lot of biographies have been written on Prince since he passed, and the majority of them are white authors and Gen X and baby boomers, and they're still mystified as to why Prince would change his name to a symbol or write slave on his face. Whereas, certainly a lot of his black fans, I remember in the early 90s when we did it, we just kind of laughed and like, oh, that's just Prince being Prince. Yeah, I mean, he got some, he got press out of it, but it was a political statement, and it was a political economic statement on his behalf because he did all that because um, he did not own the masters. And think about it, someone owns your masters, and you're you don't own your creative work. I mean, so master slave. And Prince made it clear that he's not as slave as, the antebellum era in this country, the 1700s and the 1800s, the pre-Civil War era. He's not that type of slave. But, in this fight, Prince really laid down some markers and really sent shockwaves for the industry that are still being felt. I mean, there's still a lot of artists who don't own their masters, but they are aware of it, and many of them aspire to own their masters. And of course, now with catalogs being sold, that's huge because if you don't own I mean, if you're artist right now and you don't own your masters, guess I mean, and somebody sells you're still alive and you know your catalog sold for $200 million, you're not going to see any of that money. So I mean, what does it mean as far as your owning your masters? Well, you control your product. You have sign off of whether it's used in commercials, whether it's used in video games or movies, and you also can sign off as to whether the song can be uh, sampled by other artists. It used to be you had final say too if someone was going to cover the song. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore because I know in my own music I use CD Baby to distribute, but I know DistroKid basically they have a way now where you can do cover songs and put the author of the song that you cover in, and they will get paid. They don't mention anything about having permission, so I don't know what that whether anything now can be covered or whether you still need permission or whether there are some um, songs in this era of music, the 50s and beyond that are kind of um, was books after a while become part of the public domain, and I know songs eventually become part of the public domain where anybody can do them. So I don't know kind of what the fact that CD Baby was doing that, and they were doing that in 2022. I don't know if they still are doing it, but it used to you just could not cover any song that you wanted. You still needed permission. So I guess I'm gonna go back and look at that and update you on that. So yeah, but anyway, that's what owning the masters is. You can control the use of your song. Um, and yeah, so so that he wrote Slave, and then the symbol. It was interesting. So he changed his name to a symbol. It was funny. When he's going through all this. This is right when the quote unquote the bootleg era of Prince started too, in the early '90s, when a lot of the bootlegs were first became available. So it was funny. Me and my friend Tony Keeney, and Tony's moved to Minneapolis after he graduated from Purdue, and he actually co-wrote with um, Pepe Willie, Pepe's autobiography, and of course Pepe was briefly one of Prince's early managers and was a big influence on Prince. So uh, anyway, it's a very interesting novel. It's very good what Tony wrote, and got a chance to meet Pepe Willie too. So that was always cool. But it was funny. So Prince, at one point in the early '90s, I think it was around the Gold album, it came out. He said, "I'm no longer doing, my old music because, that's Prince, and I'm no longer Prince." And so he went by, uh, there's the symbol, and he was introduced as the artist formerly known as Prince, and so it was funny. So a couple months later, Tony calls me up and said, "Guess what, man? I just got a Prince bootleg," and he said, he's about 20 minutes in the concert. He says, "All right, I'm going to do cover songs." And then he started doing Prince songs again. So we both had a good laugh. I mean, people don't know of Prince's sense of humor, but yeah, I'm not doing Prince songs, but I'll do cover songs that happen to be Prince. So we had a good laugh off of that. So during this time, the early '90s, Prince also was in a money crunch. He had, a big staff. He did the third movie, I think, Graffiti Bridge. He paid for most of that, and most of that was done on site at Paisley Park, but it still costed money. And Prince went through a phase in the early '90s too, where he was um, very, very just had a lot of ideas, and so he would build these elaborate stages. Put $1 million, $2 million into these stages and stuff. Like, nah, I changed my mind. I don't want to do that. Um, and also, I mean, there's a couple of unreleased movies from the early '90s too. So Prince is burning through a lot of money because he's having a lot of creative ideas, and none of them seem to come to fruition. I think part of one of the movies he released a video from the Symbol album stuff, but from what I understand, anywhere from 2 to 4 other movies sitting in the vault somewhere that Prince never released. And so that's expensive. And Prince got sued a couple times because people are like, "Well, you owe me $100,000 for that set," and I still haven't seen it. And obviously, Prince eventually paid those debts, but so one of the criticisms of some of that early '90s stuff was commercial, like Diamonds and Pearls. Yeah, hit #1, but it was commercial. I'm like, well, hey, he had bills to pay and mouths to feed. I love Diamonds and Pearls. It was a great album. And I think a lot of his '90s output is really under appreciated, by the fan base and even from the critics. I mean, Prince was basically competing with himself at this point. And I always say, if uh, I mean, if you see the 100 top albums of the 90s, Prince is never on there, which is ridiculous. Diamonds and Pearls, the Symbol album, the Gold Experience, and Emancipation all are, now are they just the 100 best movie albums of the 90s, but they easily, all four of them should make the top 40, or I mean the top 50 albums of the 90s. And again, I mean, Prince is sort of competing with himself, and the industry had changed, and when Prince hit big with 1999 and Purple Rain and Sign of the Times. I mean, the dominant genre in black music was R&B. No longer was in the 90s. Uh, it was hip hop, and so Prince brought in hip hop, was criticized for that. But again, I mentioned in the earlier episode on Prince and Brandon. I mean, name somebody who you know became proficient at rapping as Prince did himself. I mean, all the other R&B artists from the 90s brought in rappers to get street cred, so to speak. And Prince, was, you know, good enough where he became the best, rapper in his outfit, in his posse, so to speak. Even though he tried other people, in his posse at rapping. So yeah, I mean, Prince was competing with himself, and he was rooted in a genre that was no longer the dominant genre. And I again going back to the first Prince and Brandy, might have to reiterate this. I mean, Prince would not let folks, uh, mainly hip hop artists, sample his music, and that's what was big in the early '90s in classic rap. It was the hip hop. I mean, before, if someone liked you and they were influenced by you, they would play your stuff, and then that would seep into the music, and you could hear the influence there. It's not That was not the case in the '90s, and that's sort of lesson for a lot of groups. I mean, if they loved an artist, they would sample their stuff and rap over it. But Prince made that you know not possible. And to my knowledge, I don't think anybody's ever sampled a Prince song. So but again, Prince didn't want uh B and Ho and all this other stuff. He dealt with some of that in P Control. He didn't want, that what the quote unquote negativity that hip hop was when dealing in when it came to women in relationships. He didn't want that married to his music. So that was the main reason why he would not let folks sample his stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think Diamonds and Pearls and the Symbol album, the Gold Experience, and particularly Emancipation are very, very good albums. They have very well written songs. Yes, they are commercial, but I mean, you can't knock. I mean, it's some of his best songwriting, when it comes to the hooks in his career are there. Yeah, he didn't do a lot of, I'll say, he didn't do a lot of experimental stuff um, in the '90s. A lot of it was sort of commercial, but he was not, clawing his way to the top like he was. And if you look at Prince's trajectory as an artist, I mean, it mirrors all the great ones. I mean, Elvis was big from 54 to maybe 58, and then Elvis was you know playing catch up. I mean, the Beatles put out most of their stuff from '64 to '69. I mean, I think Let It Be was the last album out in '70s. So they only lasted 5 years. But even the Beatles, and I'm going to do a whole channel on the Beatles too. But if the Beatles would have stayed together, they would have. I mean, Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin were coming, and the Beatles were uh, going to be moving from pop to rock. So I mean, every artist faces this. You know, um, you at best you get 4 to 6 years when you're at the top, and then you know other people are innovating. You're no longer the innovator. But that doesn't mean you're still not making good music, and uh, you can make an argument in the '90s. I mean, as far as just the quality of the songs and the commercial appeal of that stuff. I mean, Prince was the better writer than he was in the '80s. Of course, most of those albums were not. Prince jumped from album to album after he left. Album to album from record label to record label after he left Warner Brothers. So he was not getting the radio support and the media support push that he would have gotten if he would have stuck found a home as far as a record label and stuck with them. So Prince did not have a lot of particularly you know later after the mid '90s he didn't have a lot of success on the radio, and Emancipation I don't think got any radio play, if I'm not mistaken. And there's just all kinds of radio quality songs on that CD. I put it right there, um, you know, right there behind Purple Rain in 1999 and Sign of the Times. I mean, it's there. I mean, those are considered as greatest, and you have Dirty Mind and Controversy and uh, Someone Put Around the World in a Day and Parade, but it's certainly right. Emancipation is right there in that second level, and in some ways, I just for the sheer songwriting ability that he shows on that album. I mean, I would not argue too hard with anybody who wants to put it in that top tier as far as Prince albums go. Um, but yeah, that's Prince in the '90s and beyond. I mean, he's totally out doing his own thing. He's still making good music, but he's not getting the airplay that he would get if he would have signed with a record label. But he made the choice not to do that. Um, Revisiting the whole Symbol and Slave. He got a lot of good publicity out of that. I understood it, always have. I don't think it's weird. Um, Prince, right before, he left, he had the big fight with Warner's. He thought he signed a huge contract with, I mean, it was $100 million or whatever, at least publicly. That's what the news media said, but obviously the devil was in the details, and Prince didn't like the devil there, and so he decided to go to war with Warner Brothers on it. So I think it was a great branding strategy. I think it's what makes Prince colorful. I mean, I know to this day, I mean, you know, uh, white Gen X, white uh, boomer wing of his fan base, they still kind of scratch their head on that. Black folks, I never run into black folks who are puzzled by that whole phase. I mean, we usually just laugh at him like, "Oh, that's just Prince being Prince. Prince is crazy," But I still think it's brilliant. The symbol. It's a genius of branding. I mean, everybody was talking about it. Even, you know, if they didn't buy his albums, people were still buying albums at the time. No streaming and no Napster. So I mean, I actually thought it was a marketing stroke of genius. And okay, so some folks still don't understand it, but it's in the economics of the music industry, and go back and listen to my first Prince on Branding. I mean, a lot of that fight when Prince is out in the wilderness, a lot of the stuff he learned is still being used by a lot of artists, and even a lot of the labels have stolen Prince's ideas, post Napster. So the final thing I love about Prince in the '90s, and it's gone away. Prince stopped doing this, and um, artists, but Prince would take some songs off his album sometimes and do a bunch of remixes to them. He did that with Get Off, and there's a house style remix that is really good. He had a funk, he had a hip hop version of Get Off, and these would be like eight songs, almost album length. He had a beautiful acoustic version of Space that I like better than the album version from Come. And then Let It Go, the Caviar mix is that laid back, funky kind of thing. Um, that is just as good as the version Let It Go from the album. So Prince was really breaking ground in this as well, and he sort of Prince being Prince, he kind of lost interest in that. But I really loved the '90s because he would go off and you would get different versions of the same song. It was very interesting. Oh, and of course the best out of all of those, I think, was um, the most beautiful girl in the world. He did the beautiful experience, and the Mustang mix is amazing. And he also did a house mix of the most beautiful girl in the world. And again, album length, eight songs or whatever. So I think they're all. Get Off is still on the streaming services, and obviously, stuff hits YouTube, it never goes away. So Space and Let It Go and The Beautiful Experience are all somewhere on YouTube. So yeah, it looks like I'm gonna, not go on too long. You know how I get with Prince, and so yeah, thanks for coming through. Five albums now. The 317 Volume 2 is out. It's on all the streaming services. Still waiting for YouTube, the algorithm to link up my new album with the other four. But I have it on here. I did a playlist of the album, with my other stuff, so it's here. Hopefully it'll migrate and we'll have a happy marriage at some point. And I also have two science fiction fantasy novels on Amazon and a novella as well. So thanks for coming through. Got more Prince coming, trying to, now that the Indiana legislative session's over, trying to ramp up production a little bit. So trying to, be a little, more frequent with the episodes. So thanks for coming through and see you next episode.